welcome to this week's episode of Not DnD, which is brought to you by EN World Live. And this week I am joined by two guests, Gareth and Kenneth, who are RPG designers who love the craft of designing games, here to talk about Trail of Cthulhu 2nd Edition. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us on.
Yep, absolutely. Well, we are live this week, so if anything goes strange, that's why. It's because it's live and it's not our fault. And if you're here in the chat, thank you for joining us, and you can put any questions in the comments and we will answer them live if they're relevant and about the game. But before we jump into talking about the game, I'd love to talk to both of you about your kind of background and history with games and with Lovecraft as well. So I'd love to dive into it. So Gareth, why don't we start with you? Why don't you introduce kind of your involvement with the book, and maybe if you remember the first role-playing game that you ever played.
Sure. I'm Gareth Hanrahan, or Gareth Ryder-Hanrahan, depending on how wide the spine is. Yeah, I mean, my involvement with the book was basically getting the very, very first copy of the first edition.
Yeah.
Many years ago, Dragonmeat, and ended up doing freelancing for Pelgrane and coming in to help out on the second edition, which is really nice. Polishing and tweaking. My first role-playing game was back in 1989 or 90, and having never heard of role-playing or D&D or anything like that, but having read and adored Lord of the Rings, there was a Tolkien week in the local library. I went in, there were strange people around the table in the corner. They said, we need another player. I put up my hand, and there had to be a character sheet saying, you are an elf who has passed through Moria. And I went, well, I have no idea what this is, but it's clearly the best thing in the universe ever. I shall dedicate my life to it. And lo, I did.
And it just went on from there. Fantastic.
Pretty much linearly, yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. I love that you saw the people in the corner like, these are my people. I need to go to them.
They were surrounded by like 20 kids, so.
Okay, all right. Yeah. Fair enough. So there was a crowd of people. But Kenneth, the same question to you. So just give a little intro into your involvement with the book, and then maybe talk about your kind of first experience with gaming.
Well, I was asked by Simon Rogers to design Trail of Cthulhu as sort of a test bed for the GUMSHOE engine, which Robin Laws had just developed for Fear Itself and Esoterrorists, and we can get into GUMSHOE in a little bit. But at the time, Simon knew that I had some cred with Lovecraft fans and Cthulhu fans, and had some props as a designer. And so he said, do you want to do the official Call of Cthulhu adaptation into GUMSHOE, which is what it was at the time. And I waited 30 or 35 seconds just so I wouldn't seem easy. And I said, yes, I would very much like to do that. And so I spent like the last half of 2007 rereading all of Lovecraft and rereading all of Call of Cthulhu, and then trying to take what was best about Sandy Peterson's 0th level original design, the one that didn't even make it into the first edition rules, and take that and port it into GUMSHOE and do my best by Sandy and by Robin. And you know, if you're asking how to do something well, try and imitate two masters of the craft. It seems to be a pretty good piece of advice, because Trail turned out, I think, to be pretty successful as a tentpole for Pelgrane, and in its own right as a of Cthulhu RPG. My first game, which I can't name on this channel, was advanced. So I can say that it was advanced. And then I had the monster manual for that game, and I was just making up monsters. I had no idea what any of it meant. And then we started playing the Blue Box with the advanced monster manual, and that sort of slurry emerged into, what do I want to say, like 3 years of running mostly that, sometimes Top Secret, sometimes some other stuff. And then in 1981, I say, without fear of contradiction, because no one can contradict me, I bought the first copy of Call of Cthulhu sold in Oklahoma City, and converted my game group instantly to Call, because I had discovered Lovecraft at age 11 on a sunny afternoon in Oklahoma City, the least Lovecraftian surroundings you can imagine, and it had scared me out of a year's growth. And anyone who was that good and had a role-playing game, that, you know, that meant they had to be the best. And so that sort of kick-started well, eventually my career, my whole life, fundamentally. So thank you, I guess, to Sandy and Howard.
Fantastic. Well, yeah, you were being a bit modest earlier when you said you've done a few things in role playing, because believe you've written over 100 RPG books. Is that correct? Is that the correct quote?
That's written or co-written or designed or co-designed. Yeah, but
yeah,
more than
worked
100
on
by now, certainly. Yeah.
Amazing. So, what are some sort of other highlights that people might recognize you from that are listening to the podcast? What are the games?
The highest light, besides Trail of Cthulhu and Knights Black Agents for Pelgrane, I was lead designer on the 5th edition of Vampire the Masquerade. So if anyone is playing the nottest of Not DnD, then they maybe have played that. And then I did 2 Star Trek games back to back for Last Unicorn Games and Decipher. So that was back in the aughts. And I've done a bunch of stuff for GURPS, a bunch of stuff for Old White Wolf, new Vampire Now. And then just, a good amount of stuff. Oh, and also I'm a co-author on the new Delta Green role-playing game from Arc Dream. So my Of Cthulhu cred is pretty staunch at this point, I think.
Absolutely, yeah. And because you've been in the industry a long time, worked on so many things, what advice would you give to people that are aspiring to kind of, work and create in the RPG industry?
I mean, I think that the advice that I could give, based on my career, is like a Civil War veteran somehow advising people on how to get into Delta Force. It's just nothing is relevant anymore. But find a game that you love and that is open system, right? That you don't have to pay anybody else to design for, and write the thing that you've always wanted to see for that game that you love, whether that's a dungeon for some game where you might go into a dungeon, or whether it's a set of rules for another game that's got an open system for a setting or a scenario. Anything that you have always wanted to see that you really love, write that. It's free to write them now. You can publish them in digitally. You don't have to talk anyone with a printer into anything. Sweat equity, graphic design. If that's not your skill set, make friends with a graphic designer. Maybe my best advice ever. But then you can put it up on drive-through, and guess what? You and I are now peers. We're now colleagues. You're a game designer just like I am, and keep doing that, and you may make enough money to pay for your hobby. And if you are lucky or too bullheaded to get a proper job, you may be able to make a career out of it. It's really it's a whole different universe now. You can write and design an independent role-playing game without any reference to any other game system. There's multiple ecologies now. When it just started in 2002, there was one ecology and I knew everyone in it. Now there's I think 4 or 5 overlapping ecologies of independent game design people, and you can find your crowd like Gar in the library and get to being a game designer, and maybe never even have to listen to people who talk about games that we're not allowed to talk about here.
Sure. Thank you. That's great. And Gareth, I'm going to swing back over to you. So where we left you is you were an elf who'd been through Moria, sat in a room with a character sheet in front of you. So how did you step into going from somebody who loved Lord of the Rings, loved games, to being somebody that creates in the industry?
Largely by accident.
Okay.
I went to college, was involved in local gaming society, running games and running scenarios for the conventions. Put some of those conventions up online back in the early days of the internet. That led to some freelancing, which I thought would be a cute little hobby. Then my real world job went away, and I went, I'll try freelancing until the money runs out, and it has yet to completely run out, which is good. And that was more than 20 years ago.
Excellent. And I'm gonna swing the same question back to you as well that I asked Kenneth, is what advice would you give to people looking to do a similar thing? So if people were wanting to do what you do and create games.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not quite Civil War veteran, but
World War II. You fought the Nazis. You did.
You've been in the trenches. You've been in the trenches.
Yeah, but definitely World War One.
Okay.
One of the wars. I don't know.
One of the wars. Who can remember? No, I mean, just to echo Ken, as I often do, the great thing about role-play games is even when you're sort of fighting your feet creatively, you know what's useful at the table. Like you're a GM too, you're a player. You know, like what sort of things you want you use at the table. You can write to that marker. You can sort of go, okay, when I'm running a game, I really need a bunch of interesting NPCs I can drop in a hat, and I'm running this game about talking bugs. So it would be really useful if there was a book of 101 talking bug NPCs. And there's someone else out there who has the same problem. You can write your 101 talking bug NPCs, find that little gap in the market, write for that, and from there build on and on and on.
I love that. So don't afraid to be niche. This is a lot I'm hearing there.
Gaming is
we're all niche.
Yeah,
exactly. It's fractal niches all the way down.
Beautiful. We'll talk about something that's not too niche. Like a lot of people have heard of Lovecraftian horror. So let's segue into talking about Trail of Cthulhu 2nd edition, because I feel like I know a little bit about you as designers now. We've done a little background in history, but let's dig into the game that we're here to talk about. So Kenneth, I think you are well qualified as a Lovecraft scholar to talk about the Trail of Cthulhu. So I was wondering if you could give us an intro as to, because there's obviously a lot of RPGs that are inspired by H.P. Lovecraft's work. What does Trail of Cthulhu bring?
I like to say that Trail of Cthulhu is optimized for investigative occult mystery play. Call of Cthulhu, because it's built on the superb basic role-playing engine, does a lot of things really well. If you want to have a game that's all combat, people machine gunning each other all the time, Call of Cthulhu can handle that. Call of Cthulhu can handle all manner of scenarios and adventures. What Trail does is it sort of focuses in on the answer to the question, what is going on? And if the answer is you can't comprehend the answer, that's still a good answer for Lovecraft. And because it uses the GUMSHOE engine, it's focused on letting players go from, in the classic way that we do when we read a murder mystery or we read a horror story, something bad is happening. What is it? Oh, we can figure this out about it. How do we stop it? Try to stop it. Those are the sort of the arc of every horror adventure, every horror novel, every horror movie, practically. This is optimized to create that experience at the table. So if you're running Trail of Cthulhu, you're running it in a setting where the game master is thinking in terms of scenes that will advance the story for you, that will let you move into the mystery and grapple with it. They're thinking of not ways to sort of balk you or go running off after a fun side trail. They're thinking it ideally about creating this unified experience of mystery solving. And that's what GUMSHOE is designed to do. And that's what Trail is designed to do. Lovecraft stories, of course, are all over the map. Some are just sort of mood poems. There is no mystery in the story Nyarlathotep. It's just, oh, hell, Nyarlathotep is here. But something like the Charles Dexter Ward or the Call of Cthulhu, those are mysteries. Those are straight up what is going on stories. And that's what Trail of Cthulhu is optimized to sort of create at the table, to replicate the feeling of reading those stories, experiencing those stories. So that's its sort of, ultimate goal. And that's why I think it stays separate from other really terrific of Cthulhu games from, that are all over the map variously.
Absolutely. So Gareth, for people that aren't familiar with the GUMSHOE system, could you give us like a quick overview of what the system is and how it works if people are learning about it for the first time?
Sure. GUMSHOE is Pelgrane's system of investigation. It's used in a whole bunch of games. We've got Fear Itself, which is sort of modern day horror, souls terrorists. We've got Investigation, which is Spies vs. Vampires. There's Sword of the Serpentine, which is fantasy investigation. The core idea of GUMSHOE is that it's always more interesting for the players to get information.
Okay.
So you basically general abilities and investigative abilities. And investigative abilities always work. You never roll for them. There's no rolling for spot hidden. There's no chance of failure. If you have the right ability and you use it in the right place, you get the information.
Perfect.
That means the GM can basically construct more complicated mysteries because they know that the players won't, miss an important clue. Sherlock Holmes never goes, oh, I failed to spot that patch of mud.
Yeah.
It's not. That doesn't mean the players get like handed the solution. They still have to put the two together. They still have to work out what's going on. They might either balk at like following the leads because they're too scared, or they need much like work out like we know this, and this. What does all that point to? They have to make those deductions, but they're not going to be stymied by a bad dice roll or just failing to ask the right question.
Sure.
They know how to interrogate the scenario. It's right there on the character sheet. They can go off, investigate, get the clues. And so for the GM, it's very, very handy because it lets you basically build these complicated webs of mysteries with like clues leading to clues, scenes leading to scenes. And then the journal abilities you roll for, that's like traditional combat and fighting and climbing trees and so forth.
Perfect. I was just going to say, one thing I like about GUMSHOE is the system. When you're doing a mystery and you're trying to give clues to the GM, it can get frustrating if the players aren't getting it, and it's frustrating for them. But I feel like a lot of the system really, as you just described, really leans you into that and stops you getting to the place where everyone's like, I don't know what we do next. I don't know where to go and what to do. So I love how it leans into that. Yeah. This is, of course, we're talking about Trail of Cthulhu 2nd edition. So Kenneth, could you talk through some of the changes that you made in the 2nd edition and what differences people are going to see if they are familiar with the original Trail of Cthulhu?
Well, as Gar alluded to, it's mostly polishing and taking the last, because Trail of Cthulhu first came out in 2008. So there's been 16 years of designing stuff for Trail, of people playing Trail of Cthulhu, people playing other GUMSHOE games. We have a lot of knowledge about best practices of how to present GUMSHOE, how people use GUMSHOE at the table, and how to encourage this sort of mystery development and this sort of understanding in GMs. And so a lot of the 2nd edition is just taking the first and bringing it into 2024, 2025 now, I guess, and sort of taking that body of lore and boiling it down such that we can present it for the tentpole and make it the tentpole of GUMSHOE going forward. There's the magic system, which I invented after having finished the main book, and we put in a supplement called Rough Magics. This is just, if Ken had been 10% smarter in 2007, this would already be in the book. So we're putting that in. Nice. We've tweaked some of what, the old standby sanity in play. Trail always split out stability. You're terrified beyond rational thought. You're a nerveless husk, whatever, from Lovecraftian sanity, which is you understand too much of the reality of the universe and cannot deal with our universe. And what we've taken is we've further moved it away from sort of the medicalizing cant that the field sort of fell into, where you roll on a table and you get a phobia or whatever. And now it's much more player focused. It's like, what does the player sense? The player is hearing and seeing things from outside the universe that may present as schizophrenia to a doctor in 1935, but you don't have schizophrenia. You are just, blessed / cursed with understanding of the Lovecraftian universe. And Gareth went through and really sort of flipped all those polarities from the sort of, what do the alienists out there think of you, to what are you, the player, experiencing, which I think is going to make play vastly stronger at the table. And then some of it is just, we had a campaign frame in that book in the 1st edition called Bookhounds of London. I wrote it all up as a standalone book, so we're taking it out and replacing it with a new campaign frame that Gareth did called Under Alien Skies or Under Unknown Skies. One of these days we'll figure out what it's called. And this is sort of a Stranger Things 1930s Oklahoma. So you're in a small town in Oklahoma. A mysterious corporation is doing electrical research out in the prairie, and weird stuff is happening, and you have to sort of figure out what's going on. And then we had another campaign frame called Project Covenant, which was our Delta Green tribute. And now we have Fall of Delta Green. We took that out and replaced it with Shadows Under Chicago, which is, what if Al Capone got a hold of the mythos and things went even worse for Chicago? And so the investigators are either fellow mobsters trying to survive, the G-men trying to bring Capone down, but now he's magic, or just standard Chicago investigators who have suddenly discovered, oh, now everything has gotten much, much worse for some reason. What's going on? And that's our sort of more pulpy aspect. Trail of Cthulhu has always been trying to distinguish between pulpy play and purist play, because people come to of Cthulhu for two different reasons, really. And Trail encourages both types of play and provides specific rules modifications for each type. So one of our new frames is Purist, that's Gar's Oklahoma one, and one of them is Pulp, which is my Chicago one.
Okay, nice. So with talking about the game, with those two different, like, is genres the right word? Styles, frames?
We call modes, is what we call them.
Modes, that's the one. Right. So with those two different modes, how does that, or does it even impact characters at all? So if I'm going to be a player in the game and I'm going to be creating a character, would I have slightly different styles or things I do for those different modes of play?
In some modes, you're like, you can't use medical hypnosis if we're doing Purist.
Okay.
You know, that's a that's a pulpy thing. Some character types are more what do I want to say, Purist coded. So if you're playing a Lovecraftian character, you're probably not playing an FBI guy. You're probably playing an antiquarian who's gotten in over their head. So those are the sorts of decisions you're making at a character level. The rules are mostly, can you fire, guns with both hands type rules. In a Purist game, no, you'd break your wrist. In a pulpy game, of course you can. That's why you have two hands. That's why God gave you two hands. So it's more in play than it is player character creation. But when you're character generating, we sort of nudge you a little bit and say, this is a more sort of a Tweety Lovecraftian type character. Maybe this is more suitable for Purist play. But pulp play, why not? Yeah, you're a gangster and you're a hobo and you're a FBI guy and you're a medium who talks to the dead and you're a mad doctor who hypnotizes their patients. Go nuts. Whatever, right?
Perfect. The book, I did notice, has a lot more kind of GM guidelines and advice and things. So I think it's starting to feel quite accessible for somebody that's perhaps thinking about running a game for the first time, because the book has a lot of material in that. Gareth, I don't know if there's any particular bits of advice in there or any advice you'd like to give now. So if somebody is thinking, oh, maybe this is something I want to try running, I've not run a lot of games, what kind of guidance would you give to them for running Trail of Cthulhu?
Well, I mean, we've expanded the GMing chapter quite a bit. As Ken said, we've had like 16 years to learn how to basically best present and structure trail scenarios. There's loads of advice in there. One thing we did was to break down the ingredients of Lovecraftian scenarios. So basically, you can sort of build a different block from blocks. You have like the initial plot hook, the various stages of investigation, the cult, the ritual, all the sort of Lovecraftian cliches. But if you're reading for the first time, then they're not cliches. They're fresh and new and wonderful. And you can rediscover them, as I did back in 1994, playing my first Call of Cthulhu game, which I still remember very fondly. There are also 2 sample scenarios in there, which are, beginner friendly. Is they're still quite complicated investigations, but they're the great thing about GUMSHOE is scenarios are structured in a very, very usable fashion, where you basically, because we break through the scenes and we show you how the scenes connect. So you know where you are in the scenario, you know what you're trying to do in this moment. Like, I know, okay, from this point, the players can go to the farmhouse or they can go talk to the old drunk. I know at the end of the scene, they'd have found one of those 2 leads to bring them on to the next place. Or ideally, they found both leads and they'd talk about, do we go to the haunted farmhouse or do we talk to the weird old drunk? So there's plenty in there for a beginning GM to get to grips with the storied and wonderful world of the mythos.
Fab. And Ken, I'm going to kind of ask you the similar question of, like, if somebody is new to kind of running games and thinking about running Trail of Cthulhu, do you have any specific bits of advice you'd point them to?
Well, Kat Tobin, the co-publisher of Pelgrane Press and sort of our direct boss on this project, was very insistent that this should be a game that it's no longer, oh, you like Call of Cthulhu, why not play this? This is much more you like Cthulhu, play this. It's not we're not trying to, onboard people from a different game. We are trying to go for people for whom this may be their first horror game or even their first RPG.
Yeah.
And part of my advice was to tell Gar to put those building block things in, and then he did. So my advice is really to take, if you've read a Lovecraft story, take the parts of that story that really appeal to you and see where those are in those building blocks. Build yourself a little scenario around that. Follow the model. The introductory scenario in the first edition was many great things, but introductory maybe not. I think that both of these scenarios, the new ones, do a much better job of welcoming you in and presenting you with a more familiar setting for exploration and for mystery solving.
Okay.
I would say that's really the core of it, is that, I mean, we've gone to some lengths to make this book very user-friendly, very accessible, very climb on. And it's much simpler to make a character now. It's hopefully much simpler to build a scenario. It should be a pretty straightforward thing. And of course, we've got the quick start that you can download if you're really nervous. And that's got pre-generated characters for you. It's got a cool little, very introductory scenario by Gar, and it sort of really holds your hand through running the game if you're super, super nervous. I don't think you need to be super nervous. I think most people are capable of running games. I mean, for gosh sakes, when I was 11, we were running games that could not be less accessible to anybody. They were just impenetrable in every sense. This is even assuming they worked, which not always. So I think most people are smart. Most people are capable, and maybe they've sort of psyched themselves into this being a bigger deal than it is. But we are there to help you and to sort of hold your hand and show you best practices and what we've learned over the last 16 years of teaching people the game and playing the game with them.
Absolutely. And that quick start guide that Ken mentioned is on the back of Kit page, and the link is on the screen if you're watching, and if you're listening, it's linked in the show notes on the podcast as well. So if you want to download that and have a little look, that's where you can pick that up. Another question I have is, obviously, because you, like you said, there's 16 years worth of experience you've had from understanding the game. Were there any particular favorite moments in development or making this version of the game that you'd like to shout out, or any favorite bits of the book that you'd like to make sure people check out?
I'm not sure it was a favorite moment, but I certainly had, not quite a breakdown, but like a challenging period trying to a good like of Cthulhu scenario is like a haiku,
right?
Like it's this perfect combination of plot hook, mystery, revelation, and my headphones are falling out. Sorry.
No problem.
I'm trying to recapture that in the starting scenarios. I basically work my brain out trying to get that exact balance right. I'm not sure. I think I succeeded.
Yes.
There were a lot of drafts for a scenario, more than normal.
Yeah. I had a much simpler job because I was given the pulp scenario, which is there's a red line on a map. Nazis are following that line. You should chase them. So it's a very easy intro structure. And then I had the advantage of, after I did all the fun part, I said, Gar, finish my scenario for me. Thank you. So that is one of my favorite things, actually. And seriously, is working with Gar on any project, whether it's Dracula Dossier that we worked together on for Knights Black Agents, on this, having someone who is as good at everything as Gar is, and as much better than I am at most things, is such a giant relief, because you're always worried, what if I've missed a thing? What if the book shipped and there was a bad magic system in it, for example? With Gar, there's my backstop. I don't have to worry about that. So for me, I was really able to have fun sort of going back to the monster list and saying, all right, we're starting from scratch. What monsters have to be in there? What monsters are more legacy code monsters that we can put in a web supplement or something? And what have we not done? We hadn't done avatars of Lovecraftian gods. It's like, well, they're all over the fiction. Why aren't avatars in our game? And so I was able to sort of put that in. So I had really just a compared to poor Gar working his little heart out trying to figure out how to do an intro scenario, I just had a picnic of going through and saying, we're doing this brand new for brand new players. What can I put in that I couldn't put in or should have put in 16 years ago? And that was, I think the monster section was the thing that I had the most fun with, just from sort of first principles, reinventing stuff, rewriting everything. That was great. I loved writing my campaign frame in Chicago. I've wanted to do that. I've been proposing that to different companies since 2006. And then Gar and I sort of brainstorming his campaign frame at Gen Con over, what the hell was it, like giant iced teas or something strange.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, and then we were just there, and just getting to sort of real time with Gar is so inspiring and so great. I mean, normally we're doing this over Slack or we're doing it whatever. But getting to just sort of watch the neurons fire in his brain, and he shoots back, and then I have to, it's a high level tennis, game designer tennis, and it's just a joy to do that with Gar.
That's really nice to hear, because I think people that play RPGs, it's a very collaborative storytelling thing that we all hang out and do for fun together. So it's nice to hear that behind the scenes, creating the game is a collaborative, enjoyable experience as well. So that's great to hear. You briefly mentioned the monsters as well, so I haven't been really touched on that yet. But do you have any particular monsters you'd like to shout out, or any information you can tease to us that's coming up in the book?
Well, I mentioned the avatars, so that's new. One of the things that sort of we wound up backing into is when we went back to good old Brown Jenkin. Everyone loves Brown Jenkin. But Brown Jenkin's just one type of witch familiar. We just know him because he had a story about him. But witches had all kinds of other familiars. So I took the rat thing and turned it into the witch familiar generic, which meant I had to come up with another type of witch familiar. And I did some research, and there was a Essex Coven of Witches in Essex, England, not Essex, America, that had a toad as their familiar named Piggin Kemp. And so here's a fun familiar. He's got a cool name. He lives in England in Queen Elizabeth times. This is great. I love Piggin Kemp. And so figuring out how to make a Lovecraftian toad familiar, that was just great fun. That was just pure, what do I want to say? Just liberatory creativity towards making Brown Jenkin. He's not just a one-off dude. You can imagine, well, they had chicken familiars. What's that going to look like? And so it opens up doors for GMs, and in a way that I think maybe just writing up Brown Jenkin doesn't. Whenever it's like, well, I guess he's got to be a rat with a human face. That's fine.
That's great. It answers questions it gives the answer to questions we didn't even know we had, I think.
Exactly.
That's great. Gareth, what about for you? Do you have any particular adversaries in the book that you found particularly worthy of note?
I was just very happy to get Quathanurin in. Quathanurin, pronounce that correct, right, Ken?
Quathanurin is beyond human pronunciation, Gar.
Fair enough.
So however you want to say it,
Indeed. Which is this deity that Ken and Robin created on their podcast when they were doing the forbidden thing of creating a new Lovecraftian deity. So it was nice to sort of slip that in as a new bit of the mythos, and it'd be interesting to see how that gets picked up by GMs in their own home games, and like the mythology around slowly builds, because so much of the mythos is like bits that we picked up along the way from Lovecraft, Disciple, Disciples, and then like the traditions of the game that's gone along. So it's nice to be able to like drop people in and be able to see what accretes around it in scenarios to come.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for coming on and talking about Trail of Cthulhu. It's been fantastic to hear about it. If people are listening and are interested, the BackKit page is up now. The campaign has ended, but I've been reliably informed that late pledge options will be available soon. So there's a link on the screen and in the show notes if you're listening to the podcast, so you can check out and get all the information there if you'd like to pick yourself up a copy, because the best way to support indie tabletop games is to buy the stuff. To be honest. But before I let you head off, I do have one more question that I ask everybody, and that is if you have any recommendations for any other tabletop RPGs. And the rules are it can't be a game that you've made or helped make, and it can't be Dungeons and Dragons, because obviously this is not D&D.
Right.
So what have you got for us?
You go first, Ken, or will I?
Whichever. I'll go.
Okay.
Or you go. Who's going?
You go.
Gar. Well, yeah, it'll serve you right if I take yours. My recommendation, probably my second favorite role-playing game ever that is not Call of Cthulhu, which is my first favorite, but I feel like I've recommended Sandy's damn game enough this section already.
Sure.
Is Unknown Armies by Greg Stolze and John Tynes. It is the game that I have wanted to play basically ever since I started playing role-playing games.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of Tim Powers meets James Elroy. So thank you, Gar. It is the game in which you are playing a broken person who can do magic, and is fighting everyone else in your horrible little magical ecosystem. So it's just a world of dog eat dog, all against all, gutter magic. It's set absolutely in the real world. It's entirely humanocentric. There's no gods or elves or any of that nonsense will come and save you. Anything that is done to you is done by another person, someone maybe you can find out magically and then go screw with. So it's really a self-boiling gumbo in that way. And it contains within it a really beautiful cosmology where human beings instantiating mythological figures rewrite the universe around themselves. And you can also play someone who's trying to do that. So it's simultaneously gritty and criminal and horrible and reality TV, but it's also mythological and legendary and beautiful and occult. And only someone like John Tynes and Greg Stolze, that team, is the only people who could have done it. Full disclosure, I was paid $1 to be the old school occultism guy, but I contributed, I can promise you, next to nothing to Unknown Armies, the core book. And certainly in third edition, I don't even think there's a word of my old school occultism left in it. There may be a couple of winks and nods to me, but that's it. So I'll let it slide with the other rules. People's work. Right.
Fair enough. I'll let it slide. But that's a great recommendation. And my friends that have played that have had the saddest stories. Like the things that happen to your characters in that game is the saddest
that are all your fault because you did it. It's your
exactly.
Your
they all wanted it. That's why they went to the table.
The third edition is available from Atlas Games. Lovely slipcase if you buy it in a game store, but you can order it or you can get it in PDF form if you're one of those fancy people with the tablets and whatnot. Can't say too many great things about Unknown Armies. I'm always trying to get my players to play it. Sometimes I'm lucky enough to get to do it.
Fantastic. Gareth, over to you. What would your recommendation be?
Well, under these rules, I couldn't recommend Unknown Armies because I wrote a campaign frame for the third edition. We are playing people working for basically a cult Walmart, collecting stock from other dimensions and trying to cope with it.
Wonderful.
But anyway, my recommendation isn't actually out yet. It's has been crowdfunded. I think it should be out next year.
Okay.
It's Hollows from Rowan Rook-Deckard.
Oh,
which is set in this sort of quasi-Victorian world where there are these unnatural forces erupting out. You've been corrupted by these natural forces. Other people have been corrupted worse, and you are sent off as government or church-sanctioned, basically sort of Victorian Ghostbusters. And you go into these hollows, these sort of parallel pocket universes to fight against monsters, and there's this whole Soulsborne-esque mechanic where basically you die and come back, and there's this grid-based combat, and it combines this very, very crunchy tactical play with this, from what I've seen of it, this lovely occult background. I've played a quick start for that, and I'm very much looking forward to getting the full thing.
Nice. Thank you. 2 great recommendations there. Ken, Gareth, thank you so much for coming on and talking about, Trail of Cthulhu 2nd edition. And thank you for making it as well. So I know there's a lot of people very excited to get their hands on a copy, which will be coming out soon. So thank you so much for your time for coming on and sharing it with us.
Thanks so much for the invitation. We always love talking about our stuff and talking about other people's stuff to a lesser extent. So yeah, it's a great opportunity to do that. Thank you so much.
Of course. And thank you to everyone who watched and listened. We will be back next week with another indie tabletop RPG to talk to you about. But till then, that's all for now, and goodbye.